I don't particularly know where the term cognitive functions came from, but the term is, in my opinion, misleading because Jung said that there were four functions and two attitudes, thus equaling the eight psychological types. Anyway, here's an accurate description of the Jungian quote-unquote cognitive functions of, or psychological types, extroverted thinking, or TE. When an idea, concept, or problem or something is received, TE works with what the data gives it through its submission to objective facts, focusing on the existing categorical properties of a given idea, concept, framework, or thing. This gives the notion of a sort of quantification. This type assimilates inner thoughts and activity to objective logical standards. This type goes about an idea by ascertaining the properties and functions that are objectively given to it, that is, from the outside world, or as it appears so, or as is logically concluded. By conforming thought and activity and forming conclusions based on external logic, TE seeks logical structure to its perceived sphere of influence, thus seeking logical outcomes in the outside world, therefore seeking practical outcomes. With this seeking of practical outcomes is the notion of efficiency. Systematic induction is the aim and origin of its thought. Three words to describe this type: implementation, pragmatism, and induction. Introverted thinking, or TI. Every time this type comes across a given idea or thing, it relates the thing to the inner logical structure or concept or logical idea, trying to conform inner thoughts and activity to subjective standards, trying to bring as perfect a logical structure to the inner mind. This gives the notion that this type is trying to fully flesh out and comprehend the idea, trying to elaborate as fully as possible the ramifications and implications of the idea. TI seeks ultimate logical understanding of the idea and is thus searching for the underlying logical principle, because to this type, with the underlying principle, full comprehension is met. Introverted thinking is the logical conceptualization of inner thoughts. Systematic deduction is the aim and origin of its thought. Three words to describe this type: analysis, rationalism, and deduction. Extroverted feeling, or FE. This type assigns value to objective situations based on and stemmed from objective conditions. This type seeks to shape and conform thought and action based on objective standards of value, meaning this type seeks a sort of traditional normative accommodation towards the object. The object in this case usually would be people. By conforming thought and activity and forming conclusions on external values, FE seeks a certain structure based on value to their perceived sphere of influence, thus seeking practical outcomes of value. Thus, the outside standard is sentimental, bringing the notion of harmony into play. Because their valuations stem from objective influence, this type seeks to be cordial and accommodating merely for the sake of pleasing others, or for others to assign valuation onto this type. Three words to describe this type: accommodation, collectivism, and ethics. Introverted feeling, or FI. Every time this type comes across a thing, it relates the idea or thing to the inner structure of values, trying to conform inner feeling, values, and activity to subjective standards, thus trying to bring as perfect and as pure a structure based on value to the inner mind. This gives the notion that this type is seeking an inner intensity and fully comprehend the inner processes of the idea/concept based on value. FI seeks ultimate understanding of this sort of idea and is thus searching for the underlying moral principle based on value, because to this type, with the underlying principle, full inner intensity is met. Introverted feeling is the conceptualization of inner feeling values. Three words to describe this type: sincerity, individualism, and morality. Extroverted sensation, or SE. When this type perceives something, they focus on the thing itself, what it looks like, what it sounds like as an object. Because they focus on the objective reality of things, they seek the highest pitch of actuality, searching for stimuli from objective conditions, seeking for objects to arouse the strongest sensation. Because this type seeks to perceive the actuality of the objective world, they simply see things as they are, thus coming off as a brusque, matter-of-fact individual, and are wholly capable to perfectly adapt to the objective situation. What is perceived is said and done by this type. This type is attracted to the sensational aesthetics of objects and people, thus seeking to live life to its fullest. getting a thrive out of the reality of things. 3 words to describe this type: photographic, realism, and awareness. Introverted sensation, or SI. When this type perceives something, they focus on how it affects the subject, forming it into a sort of impression. Because it is sensation, each stimulus serves as a subjective impression, making this type very meticulous in what it detects, and due to the fact that everything this type comes across serves as a stimulus for the impression. Because it is subjective, it doesn't focus on the reality of the object, but the overall moods, tones, mental states, and ideas about the object pierced into the subject are what it's focused on. This type perceives the reality of things through the lens of already psychic phenomena. The inner image of something or someone will be subjectively filtered through personal meaning and interpretation. These images are not drawn from past experience, but are drawn from already existing subjective ideas and impressions pierced into this type's psyche, and new ideas and subjective filters are added for each new stimulus. A common misconception of SI is that this type relies on past experiences or compares present with past phenomena. Actually, if the SI type were to refer to a past experience, they would focus on how the experience affected them, not focusing on the experience itself, but the overall impression that the experience left on this type. Impressions do not necessarily equal past experiences. For example, you could have a present impression about something, a present subjective impression, that is. 3 words to describe this type: meticulous, impressionism, and conscientiousness. Extroverted intuition, or NE. When this type perceives something, they focus on what the object could be by relating it to other possible objects. Because there are multiple objects in the objective world, this type seeks the widest range of possibilities and mental representations. When they approach an idea, they focus on as many possible sides of the idea, viewing all the possible facets of the idea, even relating the idea to other possible ideas, or possible objective ideas, or even moving completely to another idea. When a possible idea becomes a reality, more ideas are spring from that reality, meaning that ideas that are brought to fruition become meaningless. Thus, a notion of constant boredom is attributed to this type. 3 words to describe this type: breadth, pluralism, and ever-inquisition. Introverted intuition, or NI. Because this type is an introverted perception type, subjective impressions are present, but the impressions are not fully formed, detailed, or developed, because it is not focused on the reality of the impressions or how the reality of the object impressed the subjective factor. Rather, this type focuses on the possibilities and mental representations springing from those impressions or of the impressions, because it is intuition. Because it is subjective, these intuitions are related to already existing impressionistic possibilities or intuitions. Thus, a sort of contemplative interrelation between ideas is at play. It is as if an overall vision or meaning is being formed, because everything is related to the same subject or same subjective impression. Because these intuitions are not focused on the reality of things and are thus not detailed in what it detects, it has an acute relationship to reality, meaning that this type can or would make conjectures about reality or possible realities or the nature of reality. 3 words to describe this type: depth, monism, and contemplation. And that concludes my description of the 8 types or cognitive functions. If you have any questions or concerns, comment down below. Thank you.